go, Cougar Nation.
Handoff middle. First down. Touchdown! And listen to the Cougar Nation.
Every Monday night, we break down the Cougars' last game and look ahead to next week. Cougar Nation, brought to you by Central Bank. Here's BYU insider Mitch Harper and Matt Baiamonte on Utah's legacy home of the Cougars, KSL News Radio.
Undefeated, no more. BYU suffers their first loss of the season, 17-13 on a cold night in Provo. Had opportunities to win that game, did not do so. Back to the drawing board, and we're breaking it down for the next hour here on Cougar Nation, myself and Mitch Harper. Mitch, we've had a few days to digest this thing. Can't wait to break this one down with you.
Yeah, so much to unpack from this game and what it means for BYU going forward, so let's get right into it with our takeaways.
Cougar Nation, takeaways. Mitch and Matt analyze BYU's last week of play and what it means for the next week.
All right, Mitch, what's your first takeaway?
BYU, I felt was hungover, and you don't typically say that line very often, but that was a hangover from the Utah win, and I just don't think you can underestimate that piece. And we got hints of that throughout the week. Last week when Aaron Roderick said we were, kind of a beaten up football team going in, and you just sense that the crowd did everything they could at the beginning to have it energized, and there wasn't much to cheer about in the game, but there was a lull from the coaches, the players, the stadium, the energy in the building. I mean, everything felt like it was, no one had recovered from that epic BYU win over Utah the week prior. And Kansas, relatively healthy, playing confident. They came in and did enough to take down BYU. But, I know coaches and players aren't going to point to that, but that to me was a classic case of that, just having an epic meltdown or letdown after a big rivalry win. I think it was a big role in this game.
Jay Hill said as much today on Coordinator's Corner that he could sense from before the game even began that there wasn't enough juice and life there. So that's a good point. For me, Mitch, the red zone offense was the main reason BYU lost this football game. That's my takeaway. And here's what Kalani Sitake said about that red zone offense that struggled against Kansas.
It just didn't seem like it was clicking, a lot of mistakes, and we got a lot of yards. The run game was working pretty nicely. The turnover at the end of the half cost us. Settling for field goals isn't going to work either, and then offensively, and obviously the way we ended the half and ended the game, not good enough.
6 points, 4 trips to the red zone. You're not going to win a lot of football games. Because, look, BYU moved the football well, Mitch. It's taken me a few days to digest this, but they outgained Kansas by more than 100 yards. They doubled Kansas's rush yards. They had plenty of opportunities to score at least 24 points in this football game, but when you struggle like that in the red zone, it's just not going to happen.
It's a good point. And this red zone issue has been creeping up on BYU since that UCF game. Our producer, Nate Slack, highlighted on X a post since the third quarter, second half against UCF. This offense, in terms of punching it in and scoring touchdowns, it's regressing, and they've got to get that fixed. And my second takeaway from this game is I just didn't like the play calling. I felt like BYU at times forgot on the offensive side, some of their key personnel. On that fade pass at the end of the second quarter, you're throwing it to Mata'ava Taase, and look, Taase's been a nice weapon for BYU, and when he catches passes, it's typically a touchdown. So I'm not discrediting that, but if you're going to throw that ball a fade, I want it to be Chase Roberts or Darius Lassiter. Heck, I'd even say, Keelan Marion. One of those guys. I just don't think that was the right move going to Taase on some of that, and I just feel like sometimes when that play or when those calls are designed, or when Retzlaff audibles out of those, it's a predetermined route almost. And, I'd have to kind of get more into the weeds with Jake on that and figure out what his thought process was on that decision. But it just felt like that was the predetermined guy, and that was covered. And we've seen that twice now, the last two games, once against Utah in that 2-point conversion attempt, and then at the end of the second quarter. And if you score at the end of that second quarter, it's a different ball game. And I feel like, Kansas is reeling a little bit. So that was a big moment that BYU came up empty-handed.
Before we get to my final takeaway, you can text us 57500. We're getting a lot of texts. We'll get to those. And, of course, You can call us, Cougar Nation. This show's for you. We want to hear from you. 801-575-8255. What is the number one reason BYU lost this game to Kansas? Sound off. We'll open up the phone lines here in a minute. My other takeaway is very much along those lines, Mitch. I just felt like situational football IQ in that game, it was the worst it's been all season. And you cannot, that play you referenced, you got to know the personnel. And that's one of the best DBs on the field and in the Big 12. Do not throw that pass to Ase when you don't have the matchup there. And there were other times, too, where it felt like, hey, run the football here, give the ball to LJ. That was working well. There was a misuse of the timeout. Again, I'm to the point, man, with timeouts, Mitch. In the third quarter, delay a game. Just take the delay a game. If something goes awry, just take the 5-yard penalty. Because if they had that third timeout, who knows what happens? You get the ball back. You have good field position. Maybe you could take one more look at it because you burn that timeout on a situational play where you got to burn that thing to save the yard. Just take the flag. Take the penalty. You need those timeouts later in football games. I didn't like that. And the one part of the game that I think we can just eliminate as a reason BYU lost was that fluky fumble. It was unfortunate, but that's not why they lost that football game. And there's nothing you could do different in that situation. It was just a 1 in a million type play where, unfortunately, it didn't go your way. But there's a lot of other moments in the game. Situational football, don't have a false start on 4th and 6. I mean, that's a very convertible down late on that final drive. That penalty killed them. They just were not good enough in key moments of that game.
And I'm glad you bring that up because that 4th and 6, when we're talking about timeouts, it was really surprising to me that BYU, with 2 timeouts left, they didn't take a timeout there. They instead take the 10-second runoff. Okay, that's fine, but understand that if you don't convert this 4th and 11, game's over. Like when the defense came out on the field after the 4th and 11 was short, they're trying to rile up the crowd and get them fired up. I'm thinking, guys, this is done. As long as Kansas doesn't go in the end zone and have a safety, this thing's over. Like they just got to take 3 kneel downs, and this is done. So saving that timeout was kind of pointless. I think it would have been nice had BYU, after the penalty, gathered themselves, taken the timeout. Kalani kind of hinted at that at the postgame with Hans when Hans asked him about it. And I just think that would have been a spot just, okay, simmer down. Hey, Chase, make sure you run to the sticks, because I just think that they were a little bit not all on the same page, and the execution reflected that on that 4th and 11. But so many mistakes for this BYU team, and you hope, Matt, that this can be a lesson where you can bounce back from this and you become a better football team in the long run. Because I do believe that this loss can be forgotten quickly, because coming up this week, and we'll get to it a little bit later, but you're going to face an Arizona State team who's in the top 25 of the AP, likely going to be a top 25 team in the college football playoff rankings. You go on the road and get that victory, this gets forgotten quick. So this can be, a quick blip on the radar to BYU's Big 12 championship aspirations. But what makes you a little bit worried is that we've seen from this team the last 3 years where they let one loss turn into 2. They've had 3 straight years where they've had at least 2-game losing streaks. So you just hope that they can respond quick and not let that trend, what we've seen in the past, happen once again this season, what's been such a special year.
All right, let's get to the phone line here quickly. 801-575-8255. Rick in Sandy, what was the number one reason BYU lost this game to Kansas?
They threw that interception in the end zone.
That was a critical play. What would you have liked to have seen in that situation, Rick?
Well, our guy caught it instead of theirs. We would have won the game if we'd caught that.
That's a good point, Rick. Thanks for the call. It's a good point, Mitch, because if you even get a field goal there, it's a completely different football game. So if you want to point to one play in the game where you lost it, that's the play.
Definitely. I mean, that was a critical moment there, but that kick as well, the pooch punt. There were so many things for BYU that just tighten it up, and we just didn't see that same kind of just energy from BYU that we've seen this season. I did like the tempo at the end of the game, and it felt like BYU was kind of getting back to its usual self offensively late in that game. But it was not meant to be as the Cougars fall to Kansas 17-13.
Let's take a break, Mitch. Cougar Nation's brought to you by Central Bank. 133 years of trusted banking service, modern technology, and fast lending decisions. Taking the break, more to go, recapping the loss against Kansas right after this.